A millionaire had his car scratched by a woman in a wheelchair. But what he did next left everyone shocked. Before we dive into the story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Victor was sitting in his luxury car, staring at his phone screen, when he heard the metallic sound of something scraping against the side of his vehicle. He looked up immediately and saw a woman in a wheelchair next to his car. Her expression was one of sheer embarrassment. The scratch on the shiny paint told the story of what had happened. Victor sighed and got out of the car, walking toward her with a determined stride. "What happened here?" he asked, crossing his arms. His voice was serious but calm. The woman turned to him, her eyes wide. "It was an accident. My wheelchair slipped on the sidewalk," she explained quickly, gesturing toward a misaligned wheel. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." Victor glanced at the scratch, then at her wheelchair, and finally back at her. Normally he would have been furious. After all, that paint job cost more than many people made in a year. But something about the way she looked at him, not pleading but with a quiet dignity, made him pause. "Are you hurt?" he asked, ignoring the car entirely. The question seemed to catch her off guard. She blinked a few times before answering. "No, I'm fine. But I can pay for the damage. I just need some time." Victor chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Don't worry about the car, it's just paint. But that wheel," he said, pointing to her chair, "looks like it needs some attention." She stayed silent, clearly surprised by his response. He crouched down to inspect the wheelchair, as though he were a mechanic. "There's a shop nearby. Should I call someone for you?" he offered, already pulling out his phone. "No, I can handle it myself," she replied quickly, pulling her chair back. Victor stood up, putting his phone away but not moving. Something about her intrigued him. She didn't act like a victim or someone desperate for help. She was different. "Are you sure? It looks like it'll be tricky to move around like that," he insisted. She met his gaze, her expression firm. "I'm used to it. I've been through worse," she said, then added with a smirk. "Besides, I doubt you have time to deal with things like this." Victor smiled, crossing his arms again. "Maybe I have more time than you think. How about we sort this out over coffee?" he asked, catching her off guard. She hesitated, weighing the situation. He was a stranger, but he seemed genuine. Plus, there was something disarming about him, though she didn't want to admit it. "All right, but only if you don't complain about bad coffee," she replied with a teasing smile. Victor laughed and stepped aside to let her lead the way. The coffee shop was just around the corner, and on the walk there he noticed the curious glances from passers-by. It was obvious they were wondering why a man like him was walking alongside a woman in a wheelchair. He ignored them, keeping the conversation light. At the cafe, the conversation flowed naturally. Livia, as she introduced herself, was straightforward, witty, and had a perspective on life that was completely different from what Victor was used to. She wasn't impressed by his wealth, which only intrigued him more. "You must be used to solving everything with money, huh?" she asked playfully after he shared a story about one of his hotels. Victor thought for a moment before replying. "Money makes things easier, but it can't solve everything." He paused, then added, looking directly at her, "Like this coffee." Livia studied him, unsure if he was flirting or just being honest. Either way, she smiled. When they finished, Victor insisted on helping her get the wheelchair repaired. She declined, but he handed her his business card. "If you change your mind, give me a call," he said with a genuine smile before walking away. Livia watched as he got into his car and drove off. She looked down at the card in her hand, feeling something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't the end of their encounter. She could feel it. Victor, on the other hand, drove in silence, his thoughts lingering on the woman he had just met. It was rare for someone to capture his attention like that. He couldn't shake the feeling that their meeting wasn't just a coincidence. Later that night, Victor stood on the terrace of his penthouse, a breathtaking view of the city stretching out before him. The night was calm, but his mind was anything but. Since meeting Livia, something had shifted inside him. He had everything: power, money, and respect in the business world. So why couldn't he stop thinking about her? He swirled the glass of whiskey in his hand, staring out at the city lights. Everything seemed so small, so distant. His friends kept insisting he was living the dream, but for the first time, Victor was beginning to see the emptiness behind all the luxury. The honesty and authenticity Livia brought were a rarity in his world. The next morning, while reviewing contracts in his office, he found himself typing her name into his phone's search bar. After a few attempts and a quick call to his assistant, he got a lead. Livia volunteered at a non-profit organization that helped underprivileged children with disabilities. He looked at the address and, without thinking much, left the office. When he arrived at the small NGO headquarters, he was greeted by a simple but welcoming environment. Children ran between the tables, some drawing on colorful sheets of paper. In the middle of the room, he saw her. Livia, her radiant smile lighting up as she helped a little girl adjust her wheelchair. Victor stood there for a moment, taking in the scene. It was as if she belonged there, radiating an energy he couldn't quite describe. He didn't want to interrupt, but Livia soon noticed him. "Victor?" she said, surprised, frowning slightly. He gave her a brief smile and walked toward her. "You said you were used to handling everything alone." "I thought that included avoiding me," he said with a light tone. Livia laughed, though her voice carried a hint of caution. "What are you doing here? I thought millionaires spent their time buying new cars and having important meetings." "I thought I needed to broaden my horizons," he replied sincerely. "I can see you're really making a difference here." She looked around and shrugged. "I do what I can. These kids deserve all the support they can get." Victor spent the next few minutes watching how Livia interacted with the children. She wasn't just helping, she genuinely understood them. He found himself admiring not only her strength, but her ability to see beyond limitations. When she finished her tasks, he asked her out for coffee, but Livia declined. "Not today, Victor. I still have things to organize here." He hesitated for a moment before gathering the courage to ask again. "How about dinner then?" he asked, trying to sound casual but clearly interested. Livia narrowed her eyes, as if trying to read his intentions. "Dinner? Why?" "Because I want to get to know you better, and because I think you're the only person who's not afraid to challenge me," he said with a light smile. She tilted her head, considering his proposal. "I'm not convinced," she replied, though there was a spark of curiosity in her eyes. "Give me one chance to prove myself. Just one. I promise you can walk away if I mess it up." She laughed and shook her head. "Fine, Victor, one dinner, but if it's at some extravagant place, I'm out." He smiled, pleased with her answer. The restaurant Victor chose wasn't the kind of place he usually frequented. Small, cozy, and devoid of the extravagant sparkle of crystal chandeliers and marble tables, it was exactly what Livia had asked for. He was used to luxurious settings where discreet waiters served expensive wine without anyone having to ask. But in that moment, sitting at a worn wooden table and hearing the muffled clatter of utensils in the background, he felt uncomfortably out of his element, yet he didn't mind. Livia arrived punctually. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, her wheelchair moving with the same confidence she carried in her gaze. Victor stood to greet her, but she raised an eyebrow as if she had no patience for formalities. "No need for that. I'm not one of your company executives," she said, already sliding up to the table. Victor chuckled and sat back down. "All right, no formalities, but I couldn't help it." Livia studied him for a moment before opening the menu. "I hope you didn't pick this place just to impress me." "I picked it because it's what you wanted," he said, crossing his arms and meeting her gaze with a challenge. "Why would someone like you think I'd need to impress you?" She smiled, but her tone was sharp. "Because people like you, Victor, always have hidden motives." Her remark caught him off guard at first, but he quickly realized she was testing him, as if trying to see how far he'd go. "Maybe. But if that were true, wouldn't it make more sense for me to try to impress you with something grand? A helicopter, maybe?" Livia laughed, a genuine laugh that made Victor relax. He liked this about her. She pushed him out of the comfortable bubble he was used to living in. As dinner progressed, Victor found himself talking more than usual. He shared stories about his childhood, how he grew up surrounded by family expectations, and how building his empire had consumed every minute of his adult life. Livia listened intently, but without the reverence he was used to. She didn't hesitate to ask questions, often disconcerting ones. "Everything for what?" she asked, leaning slightly over the table. To succeed. To be respected. He replied automatically, but he quickly realized how shallow his response sounded. And honestly, because I never imagined another way to live. Olivia nodded, but didn't seem impressed. Do you know what I think when I see people like you? I'm curious. That you spend so much time chasing everything that you never stop to see what really matters. The comment struck Victor more deeply than he expected. He realized she was right. He had built an empire but couldn't recall the last time he felt something real, unconnected to work or the appearance of success. And you? He asked, shifting the focus. What really matters to you? She smiled faintly, as if the question were simple. People. Building something that truly makes a difference. Not cars, not expensive watches, but moments and connections. As she spoke, Victor couldn't look away. It wasn't just what she said, but how she said it, with a conviction he rarely encountered in his world. Despite the casual atmosphere, Olivia still had her doubts. As genuine as Victor seemed, she couldn't shake the feeling he might just be playing with her, looking for something fleeting. At the end of dinner, while they waited for the check, Olivia broke the silence. Why did you really seek me out, Victor? He took a deep breath. Because you made me see something I hadn't noticed in a long time. And because, for the first time, I wanted to understand something beyond what I already knew. Olivia bit her lip, weighing his response. She wasn't entirely convinced, but there was something about him that felt genuine. As they said their goodbyes, Victor hesitated, as if wanting to prolong the evening. Olivia, I have an idea. He put his hands in his pockets, trying to sound casual. You mentioned making a difference, so how about letting me help with your next project at the NGO? She narrowed her eyes, clearly surprised. Help how? I don't know. You tell me. Logistics, resources, anything. Olivia gave a faint smile, but still seemed unsure. I'll think about it. I don't usually mix my life with people who don't understand my world. Victor laughed. Well, maybe it's time I learned. She said goodbye with a brief wave, while Victor watched her walk away, feeling different from any other time in his life. Something inside him had changed, and he couldn't deny it. At home, Olivia sat on the couch in her small living room, her eyes fixed on an indistinct point on the wall. Her mind, however, was entirely occupied with Victor and the offer he had made. Let me help, he had said with such conviction that it was impossible to ignore. But did he truly understand what he was asking? She glanced at the card he had left on the table. It was still there, untouched, with his name and phone number in elegant lettering. She knew he had good intentions, but her experience with people promising to help the NGO made her hesitant. Many came, made a token donation, and disappeared. Others, less tactful, treated it all as a spectacle to boost their egos. Victor seemed different, but how could she be sure? He was wealthy, powerful, and came from a world she didn't understand, just as he didn't fully grasp hers. Olivia had worked hard to build the NGO, and couldn't risk it becoming just another charity project for someone who didn't know what it was like to fight every day. Maybe he's sincere, she murmured, fiddling with the card, but she quickly shook her head, dismissing the thought. On the other hand, she couldn't ignore the effort Victor had shown so far. He had shown interest, listened to her stories, and, unlike many others, seemed genuinely eager to understand the people the NGO helped. Olivia sighed and leaned back in her chair, running her hands over her face. What should I do? She asked softly, more to herself than to anyone else. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to decide. Memories of Victor carrying the wheelchair at the cafe, how he handled the incident in the car, and his sincere smile as he said he wanted to help came to mind. Maybe, just maybe, he deserved a chance. The next morning, still hesitant, Olivia picked up the phone and dialed the number on the card. Victor, she said, her voice steadier than she expected. Olivia, he replied immediately, his voice sounding cheerful. What a nice surprise. She took a deep breath, trying to appear more casual than she actually felt. I thought about what you said. I'll let you help with the NGO, but under one condition. Anything. Tell me. I don't want empty words or promises you can't keep. Everyone works here, including you. Victor laughed on the other end of the line. Understood. I'm ready for the challenge. Olivia paused for a moment before finishing. Then be at the NGO early tomorrow. And Victor, don't make me regret this. She quickly hung up, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. Something in her heart told her she might be making the right decision. The next day, Victor arrived at the NGO exactly on time. He wore simple clothes, leaving behind the expensive suits and flashy accessories he usually flaunted. Livia noticed immediately but said nothing. "Ready to work?" she asked, crossing her arms as she sized him up. "More than ever," he replied with a confident smile. Livia walked him through the daily routine at the NGO, explaining the different tasks and responsibilities. The environment was chaotic, children running around, volunteers bustling, and supplies scattered everywhere. Victor was soon put to work, carrying boxes, organizing materials, and even helping the kids with craft projects. Though clearly out of his element, he didn't complain. On the contrary, he seemed to genuinely enjoy the experience. "Do you work like this every day?" he asked as he stacked a pile of dusty books. "Every day," she replied without looking up from a checklist she was reviewing. "There's no glamour here, Victor. But there's a lot of heart." Victor smiled, beginning to understand what she meant. Over the following days, Victor became a regular presence at the NGO. He joined in on activities, listened attentively to Livia and the people who came through the space, and asked sincere questions about how he could help further. "I didn't want to become bitter," Livia said one day as she helped a child paint a poster. "Life is hard enough as it is. Complaining just makes it worse." Victor stayed quiet, admiring the strength she radiated. It was such a stark contrast to the cynicism and superficiality he was used to in his own social circle. Their growing closeness began to attract curious looks, both at the NGO and outside it. Victor wasn't exactly discreet, and people started noticing his frequent visits. His friends soon found out, and it didn't take long for the snide remarks to start. "So this is it? The great Victor is now into charity work with." One of his friends, clearly unconcerned about discretion, left the sentence hanging during a dinner Victor had reluctantly attended. Victor gave the man a cold stare, feeling anger rise within him. "If you can't understand the value of helping others, maybe that's why your life is so miserable, even with all the money you have." The silence at the table was deafening, but Victor didn't care. He no longer felt like he belonged in that group. At the NGO, Victor continued to surprise Livia. He wasn't just a spectator, he was genuinely trying to understand the causes she cared about and to make a real difference. Little by little, she began to lower her defenses. One evening, after a busy day at the NGO, the two stayed behind to organize supplies. As they worked, the conversation turned more personal. "What made you start building hotels, Victor?" she asked, curious. He paused, reflecting for a moment. "It was what was expected of me. My father wanted me to follow in his footsteps. At first I thought I was creating something of my own, but now I realize I'm just filling a mold he made." Livia looked at him, surprised by his honesty. "Then why do you keep going?" Victor gave a faint, sad smile. "Maybe because I still don't know how to break out of it." Livia was silent for a moment before shifting the topic. "When I had my accident, I thought my life was over. I lost everything in a matter of seconds. But over time, I realized that what I'd lost wasn't as important as what I could build afterward." "And you've built this?" Victor said, gesturing to the room around them. "A place that makes a difference." She smiled but looked away. "Maybe, but it's not enough. I still feel like something's missing." Victor couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. For the first time, he felt challenged to think beyond himself. A few days later, he invited Livia to join him at a social event, claiming it was related to the NGO. Hesitant, she agreed. The event, however, was anything but simple. It was a lavish reception, filled with wealthy, influential people, eager to impress one another. Livia felt out of place the moment she arrived. Victor noticed and approached her. "Are you okay?" "I'm not sure I should be here, Victor. This isn't my world." "You're with me," he said firmly. Things took a turn when one of Victor's friends made a cruel joke about her. Livia tried to brush it off, but Victor stepped in before she could respond. "Say that again," Victor said, locking eyes with the man, "and you'll never be welcome in any of my hotels again." The room fell silent. The man muttered an awkward apology, visibly embarrassed while Livia watched, surprised. Later that evening, on their way home, Livia broke the silence. "You didn't have to do that, you know." Victor looked at her with a soft smile. Yes, I did. Because you deserve respect, Livia. Always. She turned away but couldn't hide her smile. For the first time, she felt Victor was truly on her side. Days later, Victor stood in the middle of a park, watching the leaves gently fall from the trees. The weather was perfect, the crisp air filling his lungs as he waited for Livia. They had planned this outing days ago, but he couldn't ignore the nervousness building inside him. Ever since he started spending time at the NGO, the two had grown closer, and he realized his feelings for her were far deeper than admiration. When Livia arrived, gliding in her wheelchair with the same confident smile he admired, Victor couldn't help but smile back. She looked stunning in a light dress, her hair casually pinned up, highlighting her soft features. "Thought you'd given up on me," she teased in that playful tone he loved. "Miss a chance to be with you?" "Never," he replied, trying to sound casual, though the warmth in his voice betrayed his sincerity. They strolled through the park together. The atmosphere was serene, with families walking, children playing, and the faint sound of a street musician's guitar. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, as it always did. Livia's sharp mind and straightforward way of seeing the world always left him disarmed. "Have you ever felt out of place in your own world?" she suddenly asked as they paused by a small lake. Victor looked at her, caught off guard. "Sometimes. Lately, almost all the time," he admitted with a faint smile. "But I think you already knew that, didn't you?" She shrugged, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Maybe. I just wanted to know if you'd realized it yet." Victor chuckled softly, shaking his head. Around her, he didn't have to pretend. He didn't need the mask of confidence and control that had become second nature to him. With Livia, he could be vulnerable. After a few moments of quiet, Victor finally gathered the courage to say what he'd been rehearsing for days. "Livia, can I tell you something?" he asked, his tone more serious. She turned to him, curiosity in her eyes. "Of course." Taking a deep breath, Victor knelt beside her wheelchair, so they were at eye level. He wanted her to know they were equals in every way. "Since I met you, my life has changed. You've shown me the world in a way I never imagined. And as terrifying as it is, I know I want to be by your side. Livia, I'm in love with you." Livia blinked, clearly surprised. For a moment she seemed at a loss for words, something rare for her. Then a shy smile spread across her face. "Victor, I'm in love with you too," she said softly but firmly. The relief and joy Victor felt were indescribable. He gently took her hand, holding it in his. "Then let me be even more direct. Will you be my girlfriend?" Livia laughed, a light, genuine sound that warmed his heart. "You don't waste time, do you?" she replied, her smile leaving no room for doubt. "Yes, Victor, I will." The days that followed were pure happiness for them both. Victor and Livia made their relationship official, and he had no intention of hiding it. On the contrary, he was determined to show the world that he was a completely different man from the one he used to be. However, not everyone was happy with the news. Victor's friends, used to seeing him with women who fit traditional beauty standards and high social status, were quick to make cruel remarks. "Seriously, Victor? Her?" one of them asked during a gathering at a bar. "You could have anyone, and you choose someone. Like that?" Victor swallowed his anger, but his gaze was sharp. "And that's exactly why I'm with her. Because she's everything you'll never be, genuine, strong, and full of integrity. Something your money will never buy." The silence that followed was uncomfortable, but Victor didn't care. He knew he had made the right choice. Meanwhile, Livia started noticing the stark differences between their worlds. Being with Victor meant stepping into a space where people looked at her with curiosity, disdain, or even pity. It was unfamiliar, and despite her natural confidence, she began to feel out of place. The breaking point came at an extravagant party Victor had insisted she attend with him. She reluctantly agreed, but the moment she arrived, she felt uneasy. The stares were inevitable, and the whispers were loud enough to hear. Even with Victor by her side the entire time, Livia couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. Things took a turn for the worse toward the end of the night, when Livia overheard a group of women talking. "Is he really with her? It must be just a phase. A man like Victor won't stay with someone like that for long." Livia pretended not to hear, but their words hit her like a blow. The smile she had managed to maintain throughout the evening vanished, and doubt started creeping in. As much as she cared for Victor, she began questioning if they could truly overcome the barriers between their worlds. The next day, Victor was in his penthouse office, staring out at the panoramic city view. The bustling skyline seemed indifferent to the turmoil in his mind. Since the party, he'd noticed a change in Livia. She had become quieter, more distant. Not the confident, strong woman she'd been when they first met. It worried him deeply. In recent days, the cruel comments and judgmental reactions from those around them had started to weigh on him more than he wanted to admit. No matter how hard he tried to shield Livia from the harshness of his world, it seemed impossible. He knew what he felt for her was real, but at times, he wondered if he was fighting a battle that the world was determined to make them lose. Livia, on the other hand, was at home, lost in thought. The cruel words she'd heard at the party kept echoing in her mind. From the start, she'd known dating someone like Victor would mean dealing with challenges and judgment, but now she could see how much it was impacting his life too. The meetings, the friends, the events, everything seemed more tense when she was around. And while Victor always stood up for her, she could see that his efforts to protect her were taking a toll. She questioned, for what felt like the 1,000th time, whether she was making his life harder. He was already dealing with so much: business, family, friends, and now he had to face the criticism and scrutiny of being with someone like her. With a deep sigh, Livia picked up her phone and looked at a picture of them together at the park, taken just days before everything started unraveling. The happiness on their faces felt so far away now. She made a decision, even though it hurt more than she could put into words. When Victor arrived at the NGO that afternoon, he found her organizing boxes, her expression tense. She didn't even look up when he walked in. "Livia," he said, his voice firm but calm. "Can we talk?" She set the box down and wiped her hands before finally meeting his gaze. "Victor, I think we both know where this conversation is going." He frowned, stepping closer. "What do you mean by that?" Livia took a deep breath, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. "I can't do this anymore, Victor. I don't want to be the reason you're facing all these problems." He was silent for a moment, trying to process her words. "What problems? Do you think I care about what people say? Livia, I chose you, and I keep choosing you every single day." "But it's affecting you, Victor," she replied, her voice trembling. "I see it. You're always defending me, always explaining yourself. It's not fair to you." Victor stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Don't ask me to give up on you, Livia. I can handle it. I can deal with them because you're worth it." She pulled her hands away, avoiding his gaze. "And me? I don't know if I can handle it. The stares, the words, I feel suffocated." Victor tried to argue, but Livia shook her head, cutting him off. "I need time, Victor. Please, try to understand." He wanted to insist, but her gaze froze him. It was a genuine, painful yet truthful plea. Victor knew that, as hard as it was, he needed to respect her space. In the days that followed, Victor threw himself into work, trying to occupy his mind and ignore the emptiness that Livia's absence left. He kept up appearances, attending events and meetings, but his energy was visibly different. Meanwhile, Livia devoted herself fully to the NGO, avoiding any mention of Victor. But each passing day seemed to make the pain worse. She missed him, their conversations, his presence, how he made her feel. Still, she believed she was doing what was best for both of them. An unexpected event broke the painful monotony. During a meeting at one of Victor's hotels, news spread among the guests. Someone had taken a photo of Livia and Victor together in a private moment and posted it on social media, accompanied by nasty and derogatory comments. Victor saw the photo while in the middle of a business conversation. His blood immediately boiled. He knew this exposure was something Livia had always feared, and now it was happening in the worst way possible. Without thinking twice, he grabbed his phone and called her. "Livia, I need to see you, now." His voice was full of urgency, but Livia hesitated. "What happened, Victor?" "Just meet me, please. It's important." When they met at a quiet cafe, Victor explained what had happened. He held up his phone, showing her the post. Her face went pale as she read the comments. "This is exactly what I feared, Victor," she said, her voice soft. "I'll take care of it. I'll find out who did this and make sure it never happens again. But at what cost, she asked, looking at him directly. You're going to fight with more people, put more pressure on yourself. On us? Victor held her hands tightly. Livia, I love you. None of this matters. What those people say doesn't matter. But what matters is you. It's us. She looked at him, fighting back tears. She wanted to believe his words, but the weight of the situation was too much. Victor, I love you too, but maybe that's not enough. It's better if we stay apart. He stared at her, unable to respond immediately. It was the first time he felt powerless about his feelings for her. Weeks later, Victor was in his meeting room, trying to focus on a presentation. The projector displayed graphs and numbers that, at other times, would have gotten all his attention, but now they seemed like meaningless smudges. Ever since Livia pulled away, he couldn't think of anything else. A notification on his phone caught his attention. It was a message from a close friend, with a link and a simple caption. Did you know about this? Victor clicked the link, and his heart sank. It was an article on a sensationalist blog suggesting that Livia was using the NGO as a front to make money for herself. The accusations were ridiculous, but enough to tarnish her reputation. He felt a wave of anger rise. He knew Livia would never do something like that. But who was behind this? And why? Mr. Victor? His assistant asked, bringing him back to reality. Cancel the rest of my meetings for today. I need to take care of something, he said, standing up with determination. Victor spent hours investigating the origin of the article. He hired a team to track the source of the publication and soon discovered something that made him furious. The person who started the rumors was someone he considered close. One of his friends, Arthur, a businessman he trusted. Arthur was the one who always made sarcastic comments about Livia and their relationship. Victor remembered how he would belittle the NGO and suggest that Livia was taking advantage of his wealth. But spreading lies to hurt her was a level of cruelty Victor hadn't expected. Without hesitation, Victor decided to confront him. That night, Victor found Arthur at a bar frequented by their social circle. Arthur was surrounded by other friends, laughing loudly while holding a glass of whiskey. Victor walked in with firm steps, his face showing the anger that had been building up inside. Arthur, Victor called, his voice firm but controlled. Arthur turned, clearly surprised to see him there. Victor, good to see you. It's been a while. Cut the small talk, Victor interrupted. I need to talk to you, now. His tone made the others step away, sensing something serious was happening. Arthur, taken aback, followed Victor to a more private corner. What's going on? Arthur asked, trying to keep his composure. Victor showed him the article on his phone. It was you, wasn't it? He asked directly. You set this up against Livia. Arthur hesitated for a moment but quickly laughed, trying to act unbothered. Victor, you're overreacting. It was just a joke. You know how things are. A joke? Victor interrupted, his voice rising. You destroyed the reputation of an honest woman. You spread lies that could damage her entire work. And you know how much she means to me. Arthur tried to justify himself. I was just trying to open your eyes, Victor. She's not like us. She'll never fit into your world. I was protecting you. Victor took a deep breath, trying to control his anger. Protecting me? You weren't protecting me. You were showing how petty and prejudiced you are. Arthur shrugged, as if he didn't care. Victor, you're one of us. Don't let this woman ruin your life. Victor stood in silence for a moment, looking at the man before him. Everything Arthur represented, cynicism, selfishness, superficiality, seemed to be the exact opposite of what Livia was. Maybe you're right about one thing, Arthur. I shouldn't mix with people who don't understand the value of what's real. Victor turned and walked away, leaving Arthur speechless. Meanwhile, Livia was doing her best to move forward, but the absence of Victor left a void she couldn't ignore. She threw herself into her work at the NGO, spending long hours organizing events and helping the children. But no matter how busy she tried to stay, her thoughts always returned to Victor. She knew stepping away had been the right choice. The weight of being by his side had become too much, and she didn't want to be a distraction in his life. But deep down, she missed the way he made her feel special, the way he looked at her with admiration and affection. One night, as she was going through some paperwork, Livia received an unexpected message. It was from a colleague at the NGO who had sent her the link to the same article Victor had seen. Her heart sank as she read the accusations. They were lies, but the fact that someone had gone out of their way to tarnish her reputation left her devastated. She had known this kind of thing was a possibility when she chose to be with Victor, but she never imagined it could be this cruel. Livia felt tears welling up but held them back. She couldn't let this break her. She was stronger than that. Victor, on the other hand, was determined to make things right. He contacted his lawyers to file a lawsuit against the website that had published the article and used his influence to demand a public retraction. But that wasn't enough for him. He knew he needed to do more. He needed to show Livia that he was willing to fight for her and that no one, not even someone from his social circle, could destroy what they had. That same evening, Victor drove to Livia's house. He hadn't seen her in days, and every second apart felt unbearable. When she opened the door and saw him standing there, her expression was a mix of surprise and exhaustion. "Victor, what are you doing here?" He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "I needed to see you. I needed to tell you what happened." He explained everything about Arthur, the article, and how he was handling the situation. Livia listened quietly, her expression unreadable. "Livia, I can't change what people think or say, but I can make sure no one tarnishes what you've built. And most importantly, I won't let anyone come between us." She looked away, her conflicted emotions clear on her face. "Victor, it's not just about that. It's about how different our worlds are. I'm not sure I can handle all of this." Victor took her hands, looking directly into her eyes. "You don't have to handle it alone. We're in this together. And if I have to, I'll leave everything behind for you." Livia stayed silent, his words echoing in her mind. "I'll leave everything behind for you." She searched his face for any sign of doubt or hesitation, but found only pure determination. It disarmed her. Despite all the pain and confusion, she couldn't ignore how much he was willing to fight for her. "Victor, you can't just abandon your entire life because of me," she finally said, her voice low but filled with emotion. He stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "Livia, what's the point of my life without you? What good is money, status, or anything else if I can't be with the person I love?" She looked away, trying to organize her thoughts. Part of her wanted to believe they could overcome everything together, but another, more rational part feared the challenges between them were too great. "It's not that simple, Victor," she said with a sigh. "We can't just ignore what's happened, or what might still happen." Victor knelt before her, holding her hands firmly. "I know I've made mistakes. I know I underestimated how much our relationship would be tested. But I also know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to protect you, to protect us. Give me a second chance, Livia. Don't give up on me." His words hit Livia's heart directly. She felt tears forming, but she refused to let them fall. She didn't want to appear vulnerable, even with such a sincere confession. "If I accept, Victor, things need to change. I can't go through this again. I don't want to feel like an outsider in your life." Victor nodded quickly, almost as if he had been expecting this. "Tell me what needs to be done. We'll make our own rules. No one and nothing will interfere." They sat in silence for a moment, emotions overwhelming them. Finally, Livia took a deep breath and looked directly at him. "Okay, let's try again, but with one condition. Anything. We won't let anyone decide for us anymore. No matter what they say, do, or make up. Only you and I will decide what matters in our relationship." Victor smiled, a genuine smile that seemed to relieve months of accumulated tension. "Agreed." He stood up and, without thinking, leaned in to hug her. Livia hesitated for a second, but soon gave in, wrapping her arms around him. It felt like a weight was lifted off her shoulders, and for the first time in weeks, she felt hope. The following days were marked by a joint effort to rebuild what they had lost. Victor kept his promise to eliminate any outside interference. He cut ties with friends who didn't respect their relationship and avoided unnecessary social events. Livia, on the other hand, began accepting that she couldn't control other people's opinions. She focused on what really mattered, the love she felt for Victor and the respect he showed her. Together, they set clear boundaries. Victor wouldn't let anyone speak ill of her in his presence again. and Livia promised to talk to him before making any drastic decisions. They resumed the simple moments they had always enjoyed: walks in the park, quiet dinners, and deep conversations. Each day seemed to strengthen them, as if the storm they had faced had been a test for something bigger. But, like any relationship, not everything was perfect. One evening, while Victor was reviewing some documents at home, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. He furrowed his brow, opening the text. "Do you think Livia will stay with you when she finds out what happened in New York?" Victor felt his blood run cold. He knew exactly what the message was referring to. It was a secret from his past, something he had buried and avoided revisiting at all costs. For a few minutes, he stood still, staring at the phone, trying to decide what to do. He knew he needed to tell Livia before someone else used it against him, but the fear of losing her again was paralyzing. Meanwhile, Livia entered the room, noticing the disturbed look on his face. "Are you okay, Victor?" she asked, her tone concerned. He quickly put the phone away, forcing a smile. "Yes, I'm fine. Just something from work." Livia didn't seem fully convinced, but she chose not to press him. However, Victor knew that this was just the beginning. The secret he had been trying to hide was about to come to light, and he needed to figure out how to face it before it was too late. The next day, Victor was in his office, trying to regain normality after the last few turbulent days. He and Livia had decided to move forward, but he knew the ghost of his past still hung over them. He was reviewing contracts and emails when his phone buzzed again. The message was from an unknown number. "I'm in town. We need to talk. You know who I am." His heart raced as he read the words. There was no doubt who had sent that message: Rebecca. She was an ex-girlfriend, someone who had been part of a complicated chapter of his life. It had been years since they last spoke, but just the mention of her was enough to bring up memories Victor would rather forget. Before he could decide what to do, his phone rang. It was the same number. "Hi, Victor. It's been a while, hasn't it?" Rebecca's voice was laced with irony. "Rebecca, what do you want?" he replied, trying to stay calm. "Oh, always straight to the point. I love that about you. I want to talk. Tomorrow, in your office. And before you ask, yes, it's urgent." Victor took a deep breath, trying to control his irritation. "All right, tomorrow at 10. "Perfect. See you then." She hung up, leaving a heavy silence in the air. Victor knew that Rebecca would never approach him without a serious reason, and based on her tone, it was clear that the reason involved something he'd prefer to leave in the past. Let's have some fun with those who only read the comments. Type hamburger in the comments. Only those who make it this far will understand. Now let's continue the story. The next day, Rebecca walked into Victor's office with a smile that mixed charm and provocation. Dressed impeccably, she looked exactly the same as she had years ago, but Victor knew that her exterior hid calculating intentions. "I always knew you'd be successful, Victor. But you know what they say, no one rises too high without carrying some shadows, right?" she said, sitting across from him. Victor remained serious, having no patience for her games. "Rebecca, cut to the chase. What do you want?" She leaned forward, crossing her hands on the table. "I want money, Victor, and not just any amount. I want enough to start a new business." Victor scoffed, disbelieving. "You came all this way to blackmail me for money?" Rebecca laughed, but there was something cold in her tone. "Call it whatever you want, but I know you have secrets you don't want coming to light. Secrets that, if exposed, could destroy your reputation and your relationship." Victor felt a chill in his stomach. "What are you talking about?" Rebecca smiled wider. "I'm talking about that employee. Remember her?" Victor closed his eyes, as if trying to push the memory away. "That was dealt with." "No, Victor, it was covered up. You used your money and influence to bury it, but I know everything. And what if your girlfriend finds out?" Victor went silent for a moment, but his anger began to build. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Rebecca." "Oh, I do, and I can guarantee the world will know too. Unless, of course, you help me." Victor stood up, his eyes locked on her. "Get out of my office, now." Rebecca smiled, satisfied. "Think about it, Victor. I'm being generous for now." She stood up, adjusted her coat, and left, leaving Victor alone with his thoughts. When Victor met Livia that night, she immediately noticed something was wrong. "Victor, what happened?" she asked, concerned. He hesitated but knew he could no longer hide what was going on. "Livia, we need to talk." He sat beside her, holding her hands. "Years ago, before I met you, I was a very different person. I was lost, obsessed with success, and I did things I deeply regret." "What did you do?" Livia asked, her voice tense. Victor took a deep breath, knowing the truth could destroy them. "I had an employee in my office, a woman in a wheelchair. Back then, I didn't see people the way I do now. I treated her badly, made cruel comments, and ignored her in meetings. One day she decided to sue me for discrimination and mistreatment." Livia's eyes widened, shocked and hurt. "And what happened?" "I used my money and influence to cover it up. I paid to have it filed away and for her to stay silent. It was the worst thing I've ever done, and I regret it every single day since then." Livia pulled her hands away as if she needed space. "Victor, why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I was afraid, Livia. Afraid that you would see me as the man I was, not the man I'm trying to be." She stood up, crossing her arms. "And now someone's using this against you?" Victor nodded. "Rebecca, she wants money and is threatening to expose everything." Livia stayed silent, trying to process what she had just heard. "I don't know what to say, Victor. This is a lot. Livia, I know I was wrong. I know I was a horrible man back then, but I'm trying to change. You've helped me see the world in a completely different way, and all I want now is to protect what we have." She looked at him, her eyes full of conflicting emotions. "I need time to think. This isn't something I can just ignore." Victor nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "That's fine. I just want you to know that I'm willing to do anything to make up for my mistakes, with you and with the world." In the days that followed, Victor felt the weight of his past actions like never before. His conversation with Livia had made it clear that even though he was willing to change, he had to prove that he was truly remorseful, not just with words, but with actions. Meanwhile, Livia threw herself into her work at the NGO, trying to process everything she had just learned. Victor's revelation had shaken her deeply. Learning that he had humiliated and mistreated a disabled employee years ago was painful. But what hurt her most was that he had kept it hidden from her. She knew that everyone makes mistakes, but this particular mistake touched something very close to what she stood for. Livia believed in the power of forgiveness, but she also believed in the need for justice and change. Victor seemed genuinely remorseful, but would that be enough? Victor, for his part, was determined to show Livia that he had changed. He started taking concrete steps to face his past. First, Victor tracked down the former employee he had mistreated. Her name was Mariana, and she now worked as an accessibility consultant for companies. He knew that the only way to begin making amends was to confront his former victim directly. After days of trying to contact her, Victor finally managed to set up a meeting with Mariana. The meeting took place in a quiet cafe, and Victor arrived nervous, knowing he couldn't undo what he had done, but determined to apologize. Mariana arrived with a confident air, clearly prepared for the conversation. She sat across from Victor and looked him straight in the eye. "Victor," she started, her voice firm, "I never thought we'd meet again." "Mariana, before anything else, I want to apologize. I know what I did to you was unacceptable, and I deeply regret it." She crossed her arms, showing no emotion. "And why now? Years have passed, and you never tried to reach out before." Victor swallowed hard but kept his tone honest. "Because, until recently, I wasn't the man I should have been. It took meeting someone who showed me how wrong I was, how much I needed to change." Mariana was silent for a moment, studying him. "You hurt me, Victor, not just professionally, but emotionally. You used your power to silence me, and that's something I'll never forget." Victor nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I know I can't erase what I've done, but I want to find a way to make it right. I want to support the work you're doing now, help create real change for people with disabilities." Mariana watched him for a few more seconds before responding. "I don't know if I believe in your change, but I can believe in your actions. If you're serious, Victor, show me." Victor thanked her for the opportunity and left the meeting feeling a little more hopeful. He knew it would be a long process, but he was willing to do whatever it took. Meanwhile, Rebecca was still working behind the scenes. Determined to destroy Victor, she contacted journalists and began spreading information about Mariana's case, trying to create a public scandal. When the news reached the media, Livia knew immediately. Even though she had distanced herself from Victor temporarily, she knew he was being attacked unfairly. She watched a news broadcast that insinuated Victor was incapable of changing and that his relationship with Livia was just a way to clean up his image. Outraged, Livia decided she had to take action. She went to Victor's house unannounced and found him sitting in the living room, his eyes fixed on his phone. "Have you seen the news?" she asked as she walked in. Victor stood up, surprised by her presence. "Yes, Rebecca is behind this." Livia crossed her arms, looking at him firmly. "What are you going to do about it?" Victor took a deep breath. "I've already started. I met with Mariana and apologized. I'm also helping with her work, supporting causes for accessibility and inclusion." Livia nodded, recognizing his effort. "That's a start, Victor, but you need to show the world you're not running from what you've done." Victor looked at her, admiring her strength and clarity. "I'll do that, Livia. I won't let Rebecca or anyone else destroy what we're trying to build." Livia sighed, her expression softening. "I know you're trying, Victor, and despite everything, I still believe in us." He took a step toward her, holding her hands. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Victor's efforts to fix the mistakes of the past were gaining momentum. He had made significant donations to inclusion organizations, helped Mariana with her projects, and most importantly, shown Livia that he was committed to the truth and change. But as he rebuilt his reputation, Rebecca was determined to bring him down. Rebecca knew she needed to do more than just cause media scandals. Her obsession with Victor wasn't just about revenge. She wanted to see him lose everything. Determined, she hired a private investigator to gather information that could destroy what was left of his credibility. A week later, Victor was with Livia at a small charity event organized by the NGO. The atmosphere was warm, with children laughing and volunteers chatting. Livia was starting to feel like things were finally returning to normal. While she was handing out materials to the kids, Victor received a call from an unknown number. He stepped outside quietly to take it. "Victor, I'm glad you picked up," Rebecca said with a calculated coldness in her voice. "Rebecca, what do you want now?" he asked, his patience running thin. "I thought I should warn you. I have something that could finish you for good. A little video recorded years ago showing you humiliating your employee in a wheelchair. Remember that?" Victor felt the ground slip out from under him. He knew exactly which video she was talking about. It was a recording he thought had been deleted when he covered up the case, but apparently Rebecca had managed to recover it. "You're pathetic, Rebecca. No matter what you do, I'm going to face this," he responded, his voice firm. She laughed. "Let's see if your girlfriend believes you when everyone can watch. Oh, and just wait. The video will be released soon." Victor hung up, his thoughts racing. He knew he couldn't hide this from Livia. If she saw the video without context, it could be the end of everything. Victor went back to the event, trying to seem calm, but Livia immediately noticed something was off. "What happened?" she asked, pulling him aside to a more private spot. He took a deep breath, determined to be completely honest. "Rebecca is trying to release a video from years ago, from the incident with Mariana. It's a recording that shows the worst of me." Livia crossed her arms, assessing him. "Did you know this video existed?" "Yes, but I thought it had been deleted when the case was closed." Rebecca managed to recover it. She sighed, looking away for a moment before responding. "Victor, no matter what she does, you're not that man anymore. But you need to face this head-on." He nodded, feeling strengthened by her words. "I will, and I'll do it with you by my side if you still want to be with me." Livia took his hands. "I'm with you. But you need to be honest with the world, just like you were with me." In the days that followed, Victor prepared for the impact. He gathered his communication team and decided the best approach was to get ahead of Rebecca, releasing the video before she could use it against him. He organized a press conference at one of his hotels and invited journalists for a public statement. On the day of the event, Victor took the stage, with Livia sitting in the front row. He took a deep breath before starting. "Good afternoon. I'm here today to talk about something from my past that deeply embarrasses me." A few years ago, I made serious mistakes by treating an employee disrespectfully. I was cruel, prejudiced, and used my position of power to cover it up." He paused, looking directly into the cameras. "Today, I want to publicly admit my mistakes. I want to apologize, not only to the woman I hurt, but to all the people who expected more from me. Since then, I've been working to become a better person, learning from my mistakes, and supporting causes I once ignored." Victor then showed the video on the screen for everyone to see what Rebecca had planned to release. The room fell silent as the recording played. It was a difficult moment, but Victor knew it was necessary. When the video ended, he continued, "This recording represents the worst of me, but it does not define who I am today. I'm not trying to justify my actions, but I'm here to show that it's possible to change, to grow, and to seek redemption." The press conference ended with hesitant applause, but Victor knew the real impact would be felt in the days to come. That night, Victor and Livia went home together. She hugged him, holding him for a few minutes in silence. "You were brave, Victor. It's not easy to admit mistakes like that, especially so publicly." He looked at her, his eyes full of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you." Months had passed since the press conference where Victor publicly took responsibility for his mistakes. Despite the initial impact, he managed to turn the narrative in his favor, showing that he was truly committed to becoming a better person. His relationship with Livia had also strengthened. She had supported him every step of the way, and they began to build a bond based on trust and mutual respect. Victor, however, knew that something was still missing. He wanted Livia to know how important she was to him, and he was determined to take their relationship to the next level. It was a sunny afternoon when Victor invited Livia to a walk in the park where they had confessed their feelings for each other for the first time. The place was decorated in a simple yet charming way. Small lights hung from the trees, and rose petals lined the path leading to a gazebo in the center. Livia, who didn't suspect anything, was surprised to see the decorations. "Victor, what is all this?" she asked, with a curious smile. He led her to the gazebo, where a small band was playing soft music in the background. When they reached the center, Victor knelt down, holding her hand. "Livia, you've transformed my life. You've taught me to be a better person, to see the world in a way I never imagined. I know I'm not perfect, but I want to spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you deserve." He opened a velvet box, revealing a delicate and elegant ring. "Livia, will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Livia's face as she looked at him, deeply moved. "Yes, Victor, I accept." The people around the park who had gathered discreetly began to applaud and celebrate the moment. Victor placed the ring on her finger and stood up to embrace her. It was a magical moment they would both never forget. A few months later, the big day arrived. The ceremony took place in a charming garden, with flowers of every color and a breathtaking view of the mountains in the background. The venue was outdoors, with arches decorated with white roses and twinkling lights that added a fairy tale touch to the setting. Livia looked stunning in a custom-made wedding dress that highlighted her natural beauty. She walked down the aisle, accompanied by children from the NGO, who scattered flower petals as she moved forward. Victor was waiting for her at the altar. Dressed in a perfect suit, but his gaze was completely focused on Livia. When their eyes met, it was as if the rest of the world disappeared. The vows were emotional. Victor, his voice trembling with emotion, declared, "Livia, you not only saved my heart, but also my soul. I promise to love you, respect you, and support you every step of our journey together." Livia, with tears in her eyes, responded, "Victor, you've shown that love can transform everything. I promise to be your partner, your confidant, and your biggest supporter, no matter what life brings us." After the much-anticipated yes, they kissed under the emotional applause of friends, family, and the children from the NGO, who had become a key part of their lives. The party continued the love they both shared. It was simple but full of meaning, with moments of music, dancing, and emotional speeches from close friends. Mariana, Victor's former employee, was one of the guests and even gave an unexpected speech. "Victor showed me that real change is possible. Today, I see a man who isn't afraid to face his mistakes and redeem himself. Livia, you're the reason for that." The night ended with Victor and Livia dancing under the stars, surrounded by the people who mattered most. Victor and Livia began a new life together, committed to building a future based on love, equality, and purpose. They continued working side by side at the NGO, helping to transform lives and showing the world that true love can overcome any obstacle. And although they faced challenges like any other couple, they both knew that together they could overcome anything. And what did you think of Victor's gesture towards Livia? Leave your opinion in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? Subscribe to the channel and click the bell to follow all our stories, and feel free to watch more emotional stories by clicking here on the final screen.